The most recent Gran Turismo 7 update brought us new layouts for Catalunya circuit, as well as 3 new cars as always. And one of those cars I find especially interesting, Mclaren Mp4-4 Formula 1 car from 1988. And not only because it's one of the most iconic racing cars in history, but also because Gran Turismo already has basically the same car. In case you don't know, if you go to Brand Central and then navigate to Asia Pacific region and then to Gran Turismo as a manufacturer, there you will see the Gran Turismo F1500T-A, which is a fictional car based on mid-1980s F1 cars. This car first appeared in Gran Turismo Sport and ever since then has done an amazing job of representing that era of Formula 1 cars. Incredibly light, huge turbo and loads of wheel spin. But now that we have an actual Formula 1 car from 1988, let's try and find the differences between the two and find out which one's better. Before we start, I just want to point out that the Mclaren Mp4-4 will set you back by 8 million credits, when the fictional F1500T-A only by 1 million credits. So Mclaren needs to show some much better performance to justify that price difference. Let's begin with a simple comparison of stats. Both cars are using a turbocharged V6 engine, however there's quite a big difference in the power output. F1500T-A is pushing 986 horsepower, while Mclaren MP4 is capable of producing only 675 horsepower. F1500T-A also produces a lot more torque than McLaren. The front-rear weight balance is shifted slightly more towards the rear for the fictional F1 car at 62% in comparison to the 58% on the McLaren. The weight for F1500 and MP4 is completely identical, 540 kilograms. What is also worth mentioning is that the Mclaren Mp4-4 has slightly more downforce than the F1500T-A, 1000 on the front and 1600 on the rear, while F1500T-A has 800 on the front and 1500 on the rear. The performance point rating is fairly similar between two cars. McLaren MP4 is currently listed at 895.23 points and F1500T-A at 902 points, both on medium racing tires. Now let's do a little bit of testing, starting of course with the most important thing, top speed. And as surprising as it is, more power and less downforce does indeed mean higher top speed. F1500T-A maxed out at 356 km an hour and McLaren Mp4-4 reached only 333 km an hour. Then we're going to test the acceleration of the cars by measuring how long it takes them to reach 200 km an hour, starting from the rolling start, doing 50 km an hour. And once again, F1500T-A had no issues beating the MP4. In all 3 runs, the fictional F1 car reached 200 clicks about 1 second faster than the McLaren. And also let's test the braking performance of the cars. Both cars are going to be rolling at 200 km an hour, braking on the exact same line, without downshifting to not utilize the engine brake. And this is where McLaren finally gets its first win. In all 3 attempts, McLaren Mp4-4 was able to come to a complete stop in a shorter distance than F1500T-A. Not by a huge margin, but as the greatest racing driver ever, Dominic Toretto, once said,
"It don't matter if you win by an inch or a mile. Winning's winning."
And lastly, let's take both cars for a spin around 3 different tracks to compare their lap times as well as the overall handling of the cars. The tracks I've chosen are Tsukuba, Lago Maggiore East and Daytona Road Course, which are going to cover all track types, low, medium and high speed. Before we get into the final results of this test, I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about this update and GT7 updates as a whole. I see so much criticism under every single update that Polyphony releases for Gran Turismo 7, and I find it completely unjustified how harsh they are. Pretty much all of them come down to, oh, what about the lag issues in open lobbies? Oh, what about the qualifying session open lobbies? Oh, what about this one specific car that only I want? Why didn't you add that? First of all, the game isn't really supposed to be running on PlayStation 4. I had this game at first on PlayStation 4 and it was obvious that the game is not made for this console. So all the issues that PlayStation 4 players are experiencing, all the issues with the connectivity between PS5 and PS4, I kind of expected since the game is not really meant for old gen. Second of all, the servers for GT Sport are still up and running, which most likely explains the lack of features in GT7 online lobbies compared to GT Sport. And lastly, most people have no idea just how much time licensing, scanning and modeling of the cars and tracks takes. I do agree that a lot of cars are too expensive for an average player, player, but the fact that we get a free update pretty much every single month, which adds both to single and multiplayer, is something to be thankful for. So if you are one of those people who are constantly complaining about every single Gran Turismo 7 update, how about you just try to focus on something that we have and enjoy those things instead of being upset about the things that we don't have. Now let's go through the results of the hot lapping session and try to come to a conclusion on which of two cars is better. On each track I've done 1 out lap and 3 flying laps, using 1 times tire wear and 5 times fuel consumption to make the cars more realistic and also to compare the fuel consumption. Around Tsukuba, both cars were pretty much identical on pace, separated by only a couple of hundredths of a second. However, the superior downforce and handling of the McLaren Mp4-4 came in clutch around Lago Maggiore East, which meant that it was almost 7/10 faster than the fictional Gran Turismo F1 car. Overall, I can say that the McLaren is much easier to drive and it's much easier to extract the maximum out of this car. An insane amount of power of F1500T-A made certain corners way more difficult than they should be. It was especially noticeable around S section at Lago Maggiore, where in the McLaren I had no issues going flat through those corners, when in F1500T-A I was struggling to keep the car on the track. However, there's no match for F1500T-A when it comes to the power tracks. It was almost 2 full seconds faster than the McLaren around the Daytona road course due to its much higher top-end speed. In terms of fuel, it was expected for F1500T-A to use a lot more fuel given the more powerful engine, and indeed it was. On average across these 3 tracks, it used 44% of fuel, when McLaren used only 32% of fuel. The biggest difference obviously being around Daytona, with 77% for F1500 and 54% for McLaren. Overall, I would say that the McLaren Mp4-4 is a better car, unless you're racing at a very high speed dependent circuit. Is it worth 8 million credits though? Depends on what you're looking for. If you've always wanted to drive this iconic car, then 100% it is worth it. You'll probably also find it a much better race car, whether for league racing or some single player race. However, if you just want to experience what it would feel like to drive an F1 car from that era, just save yourself 7 million credits and buy the F1500T-A. You'll get pretty much the same experience of loads of turbo lag and wheel spin, but just for a much lower price. Thank you all very much for watching. I hope you found this video interesting and informative, and if so, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. I'd greatly appreciate it. Thank you once again, and I will see you next time.